Welcome! Wisconsin Literacy is pleased to bring you Adult Basic Education and Literacy 1 tutor training. My name is Jamie Cobes. I'm a tutor training and digital literacy project manager with Wisconsin Literacy, and I'm going to let the other presenters introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Shannon Mason-Young. I am the Northwest Regional Literacy Consultant.
Hi, I'm Marcia Connett. I'm the Southeast Regional Literacy Consultant.
I'm Anna Beer. I'm the Northeast Regional Literacy Consultant.
And I'm Beth Gaitan. I'm the Southwest South Central Regional Literacy Consultant.
And I'm Cassie McLean. I'm the Regional Community Coordinator for the North Central region.
Marcia's going to tell us about our agenda tonight.
Well, we have a jam-packed agenda, but with things that I know you're going to really enjoy. We're going to begin with culture. We'll be talking about assessments and goal setting. Then we're going to take a break, and then we're going to get into lesson planning, and finally the language experience approach, or LEA. So stay with us. There's lots more to come.
And we just want to explain that we have melded content from Wisconsin Literacy and from Pro Literacy. So some of these slides tonight, you'll see say Pro Literacy, some say Wisconsin Literacy. Don't let that confuse you. We really want to model tonight the steps that you can take with your learner during a lesson. So with that in mind, we're going to launch 3 different polls throughout our training. And those are going to mimic the 3 times that you would want to assess a learner: before learning, during learning, and after learning. So I'm going to launch a poll, and it is a review of our training from last week, where we had a brief overview of English language learning instruction and literacy instruction. If you were here on Tuesday night for the ELL training, you're going to do great at this review because they are very similar questions. If you weren't at the training either last week or Tuesday night and you still want to give the poll a try, I really encourage you to do it. It's not really about how much you get right or wrong. It's just about that review. So getting another exposure to some of these concepts and vocabulary. So another part of your lesson, or something that you would want to do with your learner in a session, is have a warm-up or a getting to know you activity. And the warm-up activity that we'll practice tonight is a bio poem. So remember, we're doing this as an icebreaker for our training, but we're also doing this to model what you can do with a student. When we ask students to write a poem, that might sound very intimidating, but this particular type of poem is a poem about yourself, and it's a fairly structured activity. So you can see that there's a bit of a formula to it, and we are supporting or scaffolding the student's writing with some sentence starters. So this is an example student poem. You can see the first line and the last line are the student's name. So it's Sal Castro. And next line, Mexican, brave, hardworking, hopeful, son of Ben and Bella, brother of Carmen, Victor, and Martin, who feels glad to be here, who likes sunny days, who needs family, friends, and work, who lives in Dallas, Texas, Castro. So that's a student example. We're going to ask you to write your own poem, and we're going to give you 5 minutes to do this. Your first name, 4 words to describe you is the second line. You finish the sentence who feels for the third line, who likes for the fourth line, who needs, who lives in, and then your last name. I'm going to start this little 5-minute timer here. And if you haven't already, grab some paper and a pen and give it a whirl. Wisconsin literacy presenters, I encourage you to write your own poem as well. Ooh, Miriam, that's a nice idea, but we're actually going to share it a different way. And if my different way doesn't work, if it completely bombs, then we will share them in the chat. So if you can just write it right now or think about it in your head if you don't have paper and pen with you. But as a getting to know you activity, please keep in mind that a bio poem is a nice way to get your student to do some writing and to share what they feel comfortable sharing about themselves.
Okay, now we're going to move into culture. So writing a bio poem and other get to know you activities typically explore surface culture, but in order to be an effective tutor, we also have to be aware of our own and our students' deep culture. We are going to be moving into watching a video. This video was created by Intercambio, and it is titled Culture, Your Student, and You. We're going to listen to about 7.5 minutes of it. In this video, it will reference a book series from Intercambio called Confidence and Connections. They're also going to say English class, but the information that they'll be sharing is going to be equally relevant if you're doing tutoring one-to-one. So let's go ahead and watch this video, and just keep in mind, while some of our ABE students are from the US and not other countries, teaching these cultural rules of that deal with the business or academic world will help them find success in each of these areas.
Culture. Is it food, clothes, beliefs? It's all of these things. According to anthropologist Christina de Rossi, culture encompasses religion, food, what we wear, how we wear it, our language, marriage, music, what we believe is right or wrong, how we sit at a table, how we greet visitors, how we behave with loved ones, and a million other things. One popular way to think about culture is as an iceberg. There are things you can see, like language, food, and clothing. Things that are just below the surface, like ideas about time, respect for elders, or the concept of beauty. And then there are things that are invisible, such as values, beliefs about family, and ideas about health. When you first meet your students, some aspects of their culture will be obvious, and some will reveal themselves over time. It's important to remain curious and remember that each individual will have beliefs and values that are unique to them. While people from specific regions generally share certain customs and beliefs, you shouldn't take this for granted. Now let's try a quick activity. Clasp your hands together in front of you. Which thumb is on top? Now switch your hands so that the opposite thumb is on top. How does it feel? It probably feels a little uncomfortable. Not quite as natural. Does that mean the second way is wrong? Of course not. It's just different. It's not what you're used to. This same idea applies to cultural differences. There's not a wrong or right way to say hello or communicate. There are just different ways. In some cases, the way our culture expresses itself may come so naturally that we start to mistake it for the right way instead of our culture's way. This is why it's so important to take a step back and identify our own culture before we move forward. Let's take a look at 3 different aspects of culture. I'll show you where 4 different people fit on a spectrum: Tony and Gracie from the United States, and Opal and Nung from Thailand. As we go through each one, think about where you are. Let's look first at the concept of time. How do you view time? Is time limited and precious, making punctuality important to you? Are you stressed and annoyed when things don't start on time or a deadline is missed? Or on the other hand, is time limitless and cyclical, so it doesn't matter if a friend shows up hours late or deadlines are missed? Things take as long as they take, and other factors take precedence. For Tony, punctuality is important. Meetings should start and end on time. Waiting for a friend for more than 5 minutes is annoying. Gracie, on the other hand, is slightly more relaxed. Running a bit late is okay. As we continue down the line, we see that Opal lands more on the side of punctuality, but is more flexible and understanding when things run late. For Nung, he's right in the middle. Time is important, but he's not tied to it. Other things are much more important. As you can see, even people from the same country can fall in different places on the spectrum. Why? Because your culture isn't just influenced by the country or region you're from. It can also be influenced by how you were raised, your life experiences, your personality, and much more. So, how might these different ideas of time play into your class? You might have students arrive late, or if tutoring, your student might not be ready right when you get to their house. It's important to understand that they're not trying to be disrespectful, and at the same time, we want to encourage students to be on time. Explain that this is an important aspect of our culture, and that being on time will help them be successful in the United States. If, after setting these expectations, students are still coming late, we recommend taking the time to find out why, instead of jumping to conclusions. You might be able to resolve it together. Now, let's look at relationships. How do you view relationships? Is independence and making it on your own important to you? Or are you willing to sacrifice for the sake of the group? Independence is really important to Gracie. She doesn't want to ask for help, whether it's financial, emotional, or at work. Opal, on the other hand, is willing to give up some of her independence if it's better for the group. In general, people in the United States value being independent. Children move out of their parents' houses when they become adults, and performance reviews are mostly based on individual performance, not the group's. This isn't always true for other cultures. The unit, the team, the group may be more important than the individual. How might this show up in your class? Some students, like Gracie, will prefer to work independently rather than in teams, while others may not see a problem with helping a friend on a test. A combination of group and individual work can help address both sides of this. Just make sure to explain why both are important. How about communication style? What's your communication style? Do you want people to say what they mean and mean what they say? Do you get frustrated when people don't come right out and ask you a question, leaving you to guess what they want? Or do you find yourself feeling offended when people ask you for a favor or say no to your face? Do you find it hard to say exactly what you mean, especially if it might be perceived as negative? Tony wants everything to be explicitly stated. He's direct about what he thinks and wants and expects you to do the same. Nung is closer to the other side of the continuum. Keeping the peace is more important to him than stating his opinion or asking directly for something. People in the United States generally value being direct, asking people to just say what they mean and to stop beating around the bush. For example, in Thailand, if you ask someone to come to your party, it's likely that everyone will say yes, even those that know they can't go. Why? They don't want to hurt your feelings or embarrass you by saying no. Instead, they just won't go. This can feel insulting unless you understand that for them, saying no to your invitation is ruder than not showing up. Again, this is just another thing to be aware of as you interact with your students. We want to talk about how to navigate these things in the U.S. so that they can be successful and at the same time learn about their style of communicating and the values that they represent. We hope that this exercise not only helped you identify your own culture, but opened your eyes to the variety of ways time, relationships, and communication can be viewed. Like we said, there's no right or wrong. There's value and beauty in each perspective. And as an English language teacher, you get the unique opportunity to learn about another culture without ever leaving the state.
So we wanted to share this video to show the connection that culture has to adult learning theory. The adults we're working with expect and deserve respect, but respect is culturally dependent. So enjoy the process of learning from one another. And this video is, we will be able to link this, so you'll have this as a reference if you want to pull it up again. So now we're going to transition into assessment and goal setting. It is important to note here that each program has their own procedures on how they assess their learners. we're going to provide a brief overview assessments for tutors. So if you're a program manager and you would like more detailed information about assessments, contact your regional consultant and we would be happy to answer any questions you have. Literacy assessments perform two roles. The initial assessment establishes a starting point for instruction, and ongoing evaluation measures students' progress. So when we're talking about assessments, your program will assess your learner at the beginning and periodically. But you as a tutor are going to be assessing your learner every day. And in our initial assessment, they're going to be identifying students' existing needs and abilities, learn some more about the student's background and their goals by asking questions, build some rapport and some trust, just like we kind of started getting to know you activities, and also establish a baseline to measure progress. And in ongoing evaluation, this is where we're going to be measuring and celebrating the student's progress. Opportunity for you as a tutor to be evaluating the student's goals. There may be, if they've achieved their short-term goals, set new goals, modify those long-term goals, and do a check to modify your instructional approach. And then now we're going to talk about learning intake. In this training, in most programs, your program coordinator, either they're going to be staff or volunteer, will assess your new learners and they'll help set the goals. In this training, we will look briefly at the different types of assessments and goals and how you can use this initial information that you receive through the outcome and the goals. And then you're going to get some recommended instructional materials, some good tools that you can use. And you're also going to be getting some background information on your tutor. So it's going to be giving you background information on your learner that you can start with building upon, scaffolding, if you will, learning more about your learner and doing your lesson plans. So ask your program about their intake process and what information that you'll receive. And if at any time you have any questions about the process or if you need support, always reach out to your program coordinator so that they can help you with your goal setting and assessing needs.
And then I will add that there is a digital literacy connection here to assessment. So it's possible in the learner intake process that your program is using that they will be able to assess a student's digital readiness. And what I mean by that is a student's access both to internet and tech devices, a student's skill level, and a student's attitude toward technology in general and learning new digital skills. You want to remember that digital proficiency does not necessarily equal their language or literacy proficiency. So you could have somebody who is a very digital beginner, but a great reader and a great, very proficient in English, or vice versa. So don't take that for granted. Try not to make assumptions about that.
So we're going to look at the types of assessments. And maybe one of the questions you need to ask is, what does your program do in terms of assessing students? You really should use more than one assessment to really get a full picture of the student that you're working with. And we're going to talk about these 4 different types of assessments. First of all is the standardized test. Now, the standardized test is similar to those standardized tests we all took in school where, everybody was timed and you circled, the picture with the chimney or whatever that was. Those kinds of tests provide kind of a snapshot of the student's reading and writing abilities. They usually give results in terms of grade level. So don't let that confuse you. Doesn't mean that person is that age. It just means they're reading or writing at that age. It might say something like they write or read as well as the average student in grade 3 or 5. Your program may use standardized tests like TABE. There's also the materials-based assessments. These help determine where to place a learner in a specific set of those materials. They might be the materials your program provides you. They come in a set, and it might be book 1, book 2, book 3. And in those books, especially in the teacher's book, you're going to see where to begin. Many of those published materials have an initial placement test, and you'll be able to use that and then periodically check up, so that at the end of a chapter, for instance, there might be another quiz. These provide guidance as to whether the student is ready to move on to the next one. Then there's a competency-based assessments. This measures a student's ability to apply basic skills to accomplish those specific tasks that might be related to what you're working on. These individual tasks are usually associated with kind of those long-term goals that you've set, and checklists are often used as a way to show progress toward that goal. For example, if you have a student who wants to get their driver's license, a checklist for a competency-based assessment might include that the student read the driver's manual, is able to identify traffic signs, things of that nature. So in essence, the student is able to use his or her reading and writing skills to perform certain functional tasks. That's really what this is about. And then there's the performance assessment. This focuses on why the student came to the program, what the student wants to do with the new skills that they're going to learn, and how the student currently uses their skills in their own life. Do they need it at work? Do they use it at home? Performance assessments involve the student and tutor in conversations about the student's use of these literacy skills that we're trying to help them gain, both inside and outside the classroom. The focus of the performance assessment is summed up by the student has used whatever it might be. Each of these assessments mentioned have their own strengths and weaknesses. Standardized tests are easy to quantify. Materials based on assessments provide detailed, regular insights into the student's learning. Competency-based assessments demonstrate really clear progress toward the student's goal, those checklists. And the performance assessments show long-term impact on the student's life. But a good assessment process will include all of these or some of these types that will really give you and the student a good picture of where they're at. Next, we're going to just touch on the portfolio assessment. This is often used to really give a student a very concrete look at their progress. In the portfolio, begin to gather the work that they do. It might be papers they've written, it might be reading that they've done, it might be fluency activities. And as they continue to progress, each of those pages is added to the student's portfolio. And the student will begin to see, oh my gosh, this was all I could do the second day that I was here. But my gosh, look, I can read these paragraphs now. So it's a very visual experience. The portfolio assessment, I might add, is something that's used very often in GED or HSED programs. When a student doesn't test well, when they can't truly prove what they know in testing because of test anxiety or what have you, a portfolio is a really clear way that they can demonstrate various skills, whether it's report writing or research or reading quizzes or any of those kinds of things. A portfolio is a great assessment to use.
And a final type of assessment is a self-assessment. So this is getting the students to acknowledge their own progress and their skills. It can tell us about the student's learning preferences and perceived abilities or skills. It can be done at any time, before, during, and after work with your learner. And it supports persistence and motivation. So even if we as tutors assess that our learner is progressing skill-wise, if our learner isn't comfortable or confident using those skills in everyday situations, we haven't achieved our goals. So learners need to see progress toward their own goals, and self-assessment is a really good way for them to acknowledge that progress themselves and to put some language around it too. At the end of our training, you will see a type of self-assessment that we'll use as our third poll. It's called a can-do list. We're going to move into goal setting, but we want you to see that it's really a cyclical process, a repetitive process. We assess, and then we set new goals if our student has met the goals that they already set. And then we continue to assess and set new goals. There is a digital literacy connection with goal setting as well. So we might have students that come to us and very explicitly say, I want to increase my computer skills, but often their goals sound a little bit different. Like, I want to enroll in college classes, or I want to get a better job. And you might recognize this graph from an earlier training. It's just a reminder that digital skills are needed in so many different areas of our lives. So as tutors, we want to be able to listen to what a student's goal is and then recognize the digital skills and the vocabulary required to achieve that goal.
Okay, so we're going to have a little practice or a little opportunity to work on setting goals and to get familiar with one of the tools that will be in the handout that you get, or the handout packet that you get after today's training. So what we're going to do is I'm going to read you a student scenario. We're all going to listen to it as a group. And then we're going to pull up a document. Jamie, could you pull the document up for when it's time and be our note taker?
Yes, I will work on that.
Thank you. If not, I can share too, but I would prefer if someone else were able to do that. So then we're going to complete a form together and talk about how to measure goals, or what are good goals to set that you can measure so that you can show your learner progress, which is very motivating. Adults like to have their goals be relevant, and so to see that they're able to accomplish what they're trying to do is extremely motivating. And also for you as a tutor to see them accomplish those goals. So I'm going to read for you the scenario about Liz. So please think about Liz and what might be some goals that she would want to set. Liz is a young woman married with 2 children, ages 7 and 5. She dropped out of school in the 9th grade and reads at about a 5th grade level. She works as an aide in a local nursing home. She likes working at the nursing home and working in healthcare. She wants to get a job as a licensed practical nurse and perhaps someday a registered nurse. The work is easier and the pay is better. She knows she needs to go to school for that. Her 2 children enjoy school and are doing very well. She is very proud of them. She chaperones field trips with her kids when she doesn't have to work, and she enjoys learning new things when she goes on the field trips. Her husband is in construction and sometimes works on sites that are out of town. Because of that, she has the primary responsibility for managing the home and paying the bills. In addition to taking care of her family, she likes to garden and is involved in her church. So now we're going to role play in a sense. So what I want you to do is think of yourself as Liz. And so with the scenario we just came up with, if you were Liz, what might be, and this is something that your tutor could help you fill out. So the first part here is a goal statement. I need to improve something so that I can do something. We do have a template of this goal statement and goal planning sheet that you will receive in your handout packet after the session today. So we hope that you will look at it. It is in a Word format, so you can edit it. You can, add lines if you want to, or make it something that works for you and your learner.
All right, we are headed into a break, but before we go to that break, we're going to launch a second poll. And the second poll mimics a different type of assessment that you could do with your learner called an exit ticket or an exit check. So it's just a way to review information once again and see what they took away. We're going to move on to talking about lesson planning.
Great. So we are going to be learning a framework for developing lessons. And I want to point out that this is a generic framework and planning process. And as you start to use published instructional materials, whatever your program is using, you may find that the materials are organized differently. However, if you take a good look at the materials, you will see that the same lesson plan elements will be reflected in them, although they may be in different places or have different levels of emphasis. We want to stress that having a good lesson framework and planning process will make it possible for you to effectively and creatively use any set of materials that you have at your fingertips, and you'll be able to prepare to create those lessons based on the specific needs of your students. And one note we just want you to keep in mind that your lessons should also be multisensory. Studies have shown that we retain 20% of what we hear, 40% of what we see, and 80% of what we do. So you want to keep your learner engaged and energized when we're doing our lesson planning. We will, in our learning objectives, we're going to be explaining a 3-part planning process you can use for your lesson planning. This process begins with thinking about what your student wants to learn, and then thinking about how you will teach what the student wants to learn, and then finally thinking about how you and your learner will be measuring what they have learned. We're going to name and understand what happens in the 3 segments of how will I teach portion of the planning process. And these 3 segments are going to be how we'll structure our lesson plan. And at the core of our lesson plan is what the student reads. And we'll also be talking about how tutors can identify what you need to do before a student reads, during reading, and after reading. And we'll add some learning principles, tips, and strategies to help you plan your lesson plan.
So on this slide, it just is a nice visual of the lesson planning process, and Shannon started to get into it. So it also mimics that goal setting process that we talked about with Anna's example student. So you start by asking, what does the student want to know? And how will I teach it? And then how will I measure it? Okay, sometimes I like to, this is a very tutor-centered question. How will I teach? How will we measure? But you can also think of that middle question is, how will the student learn it? And how will the student practice? What are they going to do?
So when we think about lesson segments, in the past training, we learned about the 4 components of reading: alphabetics, vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension. Well, writing reinforces and supports each of those components. And in any lesson, students will work on most or all of those. You'll be getting a handout called Literacy Lesson Segments. So watch for that. That will kind of shore up some of what we're talking about here. So let's think about the lesson plan in 3 parts, as you see here: the before, during, and after. We're going to start by talking about more advanced students who have some skills already. And a little bit later, we'll talk about those beginning students. So before students read, they'll work on things that make it easier for them to understand what it is they're reading. So after reviewing a lesson's topic and the learning activities, they will learn maybe new vocabulary that they will see in the story. And they'll begin to apply some kind of broad comprehension strategies, that critical thinking that we hear about so much, like thinking about what they already know in the story that's coming. As students read the central story or the article for the lesson that you're giving, they'll continue to apply comprehension strategies and interact with the text as they read it. That will really drive it all home. Remember, reading comprehension requires the reader to engage actively with the text. A lot of development and reinforcement of different reading skills takes place after students have finished reading. In this part of the lesson, students will check their overall comprehension of the story. You'll talk about it. Use the story to practice specific comprehension skills. They'll complete vocabulary practice activities that maybe build depth of understanding and prepare the student to use new vocabulary words to express ideas, actually put them to use. Maybe they'll write something related to the story that gives them an opportunity to practice composition and writing mechanics. I used to love to ask students to write a different ending to something that we read if it were a fictional story. Practice fluency by going back and rereading small segments, less than a paragraph of the story out loud. Built-in evaluation points in each segment, before, during, and after, will allow students to see that they're meeting those learning goals that they've set with you. So Jamie, let's talk a little bit about digital literacy.
Right. So those 3 segments that Marcia showed you, nowhere did it say digital literacy, but I do want to make the connection here that we can use the technology to engage and extend the learning, the reading and the writing, and make it multisensory, like Shannon was saying. We can also plan authentic digital tasks that reinforce the learning, because there are digital versions of reading. There's digital listening, digital writing, and digital speaking. And so if you incorporate technology and the digital skill building, we just ask you to think about and anticipate those digital skills that might need direct instruction. To illustrate the 3 segments of a lesson plan, we're going to put it into context for you tonight. So we want you to imagine that you have a student whose goal is to be able to write a resume. So we will consider that competency of writing a resume. Now that might sound like purely just a writing lesson, but wherever there is writing, there can also be reading. So we will have lots of opportunities, or we will give the student lots of opportunities to read example resumes, to read about suggestions for writing resumes and things like that. So in this lesson example that we'll give you tonight, we'll have 3 objectives. What is the student going to be able to do? The first one is learn common action words found on a resume, describe and use proper formatting for an experience section of the resume, and make a list of action words to use on their own resume. So if we break that lesson down into 3 parts, we have the before reading part. And some appropriate activities to do in that segment of the lesson is a warm-up by activating the student's prior knowledge. It's a place to introduce new vocabulary, especially vocabulary that they'll encounter in the text that you're going to ask them to read. And it's a place to preview and predict. So a warm-up with prior knowledge might sound like, last time we looked at this resume here on the right, and notice that it's divided into sections. What's the purpose of the section at the top of this resume? And so in theory, our previous lesson probably dealt with this section at the top, where Joseph Ramirez is resourceful and quick thinking, et cetera, et cetera. And if we are tying it all together, we could maybe use some words from the bio poem, the warm-up activity, to put in that section of our student's resume. And then to activate prior knowledge and make a personal connection, you could continue by saying, today we're going to look at the experience section of the resume. What experience do you have? What job experience? Then we'd go on to introduce new vocabulary. And I'm going to show you an example of how you can do that using a digital tool. So this is a vocabulary activity created with a tool called Jamboard. And I've selected the action words on the left. And then on the Post-it notes in yellow, we have definitions. I know what action words are going to show up in the resume I ask the student to read. So I've included those in this list, but I've also included others that he or she might find useful. So I might start by saying, let's read each of these words. Are there any words that you already know that you can match? For example, complete. Complete is the same as finish. And so I would go through this vocabulary activity with the student and get them to match as a way to introduce this new vocabulary. And then a final activity in the before reading segment of the lesson plan would be to have the student preview the text that they're about to read and make some predictions. So that could sound like, today we'll read the experience section of some example resumes. I can tell from the heading on this resume that Joseph has experience as a receptionist. Okay, so that's a preview. And then to predict, let's predict what we might read in this section. What do you think he did as a receptionist? And so that's going to activate the student's prior knowledge and get them ready to read. The second part of the lesson plan then is the during reading. And here's where I want to remind you of the instructional approaches of direct instruction and discovery learning. So direct instruction is that I do, we do, you do. And it's also where the tutor is going to present information. Or say the rule about writing the experience section of a resume is this. But it's very teacher-centered. And as Shannon reminded us, we only retain 20% of what we hear. But reading is a great place to bring in discovery learning, okay? Because it's going to elicit info from the student. The student is making their own meaning as they read. So we'll ask the student, can you see a pattern in this resume, the experience section? And then it becomes very student-centered. And because the student is doing something, we retain 80% of what we do. So here's what that could look like in this during reading section. I would say, let's read the experience section of this resume, but I want to give my student an interactive strategy, like Marcia was saying, while they're reading. Oftentimes we think of reading as a very passive activity, but if they're doing a strategy, it's helping out even more. So the strategy I might give for this is highlight the beginning word in each bulleted line that we're reading. Let me pick a highlighter here. So as my student's reading, they're highlighting managed, completed, that they saw in that vocabulary activity, organized, and checked. Okay, and once we finish reading that section, then I get the student to tell me the rule or the pattern. Can you describe the format of an experience section? What did you notice? Well, they all start with those action words. And we could go even further by talking about how they all end in ED, and maybe the rule as to when you pick a verb in the present or when you pick a verb in the past for resumes. Oops. And then we get to the after reading. So we've finished reading that section of the resume. Here's a perfect place to check comprehension, to go back and review that vocabulary that you introduced, but now in the context of what they read. It's a place where you could analyze writing style and sentence structure. And it's definitely a place to practice writing. Okay, so checking comprehension might sound like me saying, in your own words, what did he do as a receptionist? So that skill of summarizing is a way to check that they understood. I could go back and review the vocabulary in context. So managed and completed. Can you use different words there that mean the same thing? Okay, to check the understanding of those words. I could analyze style and sentence structure. So my student noticed that each of these started with an action word, but I could also point out that these are really long sentences. They're pretty sophisticated. So not only is there a verb here, managed a phone switchboard, but there's also a second one. So I could help my student build that structure. One verb and another verb in the same line. And then finally, like I said, it's a place to practice writing the experience section of a resume. But we would never, from this reading, just send our student off to write their own section of a resume. This is a great place to use some scaffolding. And so to start with lots of support from you, the tutor, and to build on that until they are able to. With that in mind, we want to think about scaffolding as structured practice, semi-structured practice, and then we'll talk about free practice in just a minute. And the metaphor I'll use here tonight is the bikes. Okay, so structured practice is like that tricycle. Those back wheels are not coming off, they're sturdy, and you got this, but it's lots of support. Okay, the semi-structured practice are activities we design that have some training wheels where the student can wobble a little bit, but those training wheels are going to catch them and you're going to provide that support when needed. So here's some examples. A structured practice activity for writing the experience section of a resume. We have a picture of the person driving the forklift, and I've got blanks. Okay. And then I've provided a word bank. So I've provided the support, and I've got 4 choices there with 3 sentences. So I'm giving the student lots of support, and we're looking for accuracy. Can you choose the best word to complete these sentences? And once they've chosen correctly, I could then move on and say, can we put them in the past tense? And we could work on that. And just a reminder that this is a good place then to integrate digital literacy. So if they complete this structured practice and it looks like they're getting it, I might move on and ask them to type those sentences on a Word document. So they're not generating their own sentences yet, they're just practicing the typing, and I would explicitly teach them that bullet point formatting on a Word document. Semi-structured practice, again, removes some of that support. And so I'm still giving the student some verbs to use: assist, complete, manage, provide. But they're looking at a picture now, and they're going to generate more of their own language to create those sentences in an experience section of a resume. And then finally, as a tutor, you have to sort of gauge, how did they do on the structured practice? How did they do on the semi-structured practice? If it's a low level of frustration and it seems like they're getting it, then free practice is an appropriate thing to add to your lesson in this third segment. So free practice is they are biking on their own. And that in this particular lesson could look like asking your student to make a list of action words that they could use on their resume, and then writing 3 bulleted lines for a job that they have had. And then finally, I'll remind you that assessment is this ongoing process, right? So we started with some objectives. Did the student demonstrate those lesson objectives? We can add an assessment like an exit ticket or something like that at the end, but we have also been assessing all along, and we've got ways to measure that. So did they learn common action words found on a resume? Well, I have evidence of that if they did the matching vocabulary activity, and when they read, if they could say it in their own words. Are they able to describe and use proper formatting for the experience section of a resume? I have evidence of that too, if they're able to tell me that rule. I highlighted all those verbs. What did you notice? Okay. And then can they make a list of action words to use on their own resume? I will have had evidence of that too with that free practice.
Okay, so let's talk about those beginning students. Keep in mind, we're talking about ABE students, but you are going to come across adult basic education students who really don't have much background in reading. Maybe they got passed along in school, maybe they didn't attend school very regularly. There's lots of reasons. So we're going to focus on those beginning students, and instruction for these folks emphasizes different reading components than the instruction for that more advanced reader that we talked about. Students who read at a higher literacy level, for our purposes, we'll define that maybe as a 3rd, 4th grade level or above, primarily need exposure to a variety of texts. They need to read at a higher level. But a student at the lower level needs a much different experience. So as students develop some skills and apply them to more advanced text, their vocabularies continue to expand. And that's what you'll be looking for. Beginning level students, again, those that are reading at that 3rd, 4th grade level, typically need help decoding words. They need to develop all of those alphabetics and word analysis skills that make decoding, looking at words and taking them apart, easier. And we're going to talk about that more in the next session that we're doing. Because successful decoding relies on students being able to connect to words that are part of their existing vocabulary, reading selections for beginning students emphasizes sort of those everyday words. This gives the student an opportunity to practice and to refine their decoding skills. So let's take a look at what this would look like. Look at the before segment there in the orange. Instead of learning new vocabulary, here students are going to focus on a few decoding skills, often overrepresented in the reading passage. The skill might be recognizing the letter B and the sound that it makes, or it might be recognizing a word pattern like AN and ALL, the words that can be made into other patterns. Typically, a few sight words will also be taught. A broad comprehension strategy may also be to introduce before the student reads. For example, you might ask the student to look at a picture and predict what the story is going to be about. Or kind of comprehend. It's a comprehension practice at its most basic level. And then you can provide a lot of support and guidance through that process. Next is the during reading segment. That's the purple. Unlike the higher level student who focuses on comprehension, here we're going to focus on decoding words accurately. That means they have a little brain power left over to decide or to dedicate what that comprehension is. You, as the tutor, will need to provide guidance and support as the student reads. This support might include drawing attention to those sight words that they know that are in the sentence or the paragraph that they're going to be looking at, or maybe providing the correct word when a student stumbles. Text passages are usually short, and students may require multiple readings before they can actually decode accurately enough to read fluently. And you remember, fluently meant easily through the sentence, and then shift their efforts to comprehension. So lots to accomplish for them. After a student finishes reading, then check for comprehension by asking straightforward, factual questions. Point out that comprehension work in this context is very basic because the main focus is on developing those decoding skills. In additional activities, students practice those decoding skills emphasized in the lesson and maybe apply them to different words or contexts. The goal is to help them apply decoding skills with confidence when they encounter words that are unfamiliar. So just helping them through it. This segment of the lesson plan may also include phonemic awareness practice. These are those oral activities that help students recognize and manipulate the sounds of words. Even native English speakers oftentimes have trouble pronouncing the sounds of words. Like fluency activities, these are often left out of those student workbooks that you might be using. And maybe you'll find something in the teacher's guide that will help you develop phonemic awareness activities, or maybe you just want to try to come up with some on your own. Writing activities will typically be at the word or sentence level for the very beginning students. Writing will emphasize those same alphabetic principles that were presented in that main lesson they worked on. So as students improve their alphabetics and word analysis skills, they'll increase their sight words and their reading vocabularies, and they'll begin to see and enjoy their successes. Jamie, how about some other activities?
All right, so we just wanted to show you what a lesson might look like for a beginner learner and how the focus changes a little bit, like Marcia was saying. So instead of writing a resume or being able to explain a resume, the lesson plan objectives change to reading a text. It's really focused on reading that text. So reading the text, a job, and I'll show you that text in just a minute, independently and with fluency. And apply vocab from the text to a personal job search. So we've chosen a text that's about a job because we still want to keep it relevant for the student, but we also want to make sure that it's level appropriate. So we still have before reading activities. We can warm up with prior knowledge. So reviewing the last lesson, making a personal connection. But we really do more focus on what I would call word work and what Marcia has told us about alphabetic skills, decoding, and sight words. And then, like Marcia said, a preview and a prediction using a picture. So I'm going to show you this text. It comes from the source ABC English, and it is instructionally level appropriate for a third or fourth grade reader, even below that. And so you can see it's a pretty short text, and we'll want the student to be able to read that independently and fluently. And so one thing that we can do is the word work. Pick out the sight words, those words that may be hard to sound out phonetically, but that we want our student to recognize and be able to decode pretty automatically. And so this might be an appropriate activity for sight words. Remember, we got to keep it fun. We got to keep it multisensory and engaging. So these are the sight words in that text, but I can use them and I can play like a game. And this one I've designed is a Connect 4 game. So I might have my student be the red dots, the tutor can be the yellow dots. And as we're reading these quickly and pronouncing them, we're just putting a dot over them. And because it's Connect 4, we're trying to get 4 in a row. Another type of word work activity that I could do is you say, hey, in addition to the sight words, we're going to have some words that have 2 syllables or 3 syllables. So let's practice sounding out those syllables together and then reading the words without the boxes and seeing if we can draw our own boxes. These activities come from this ABC English resource. So during reading, I would have my student read that text, but I might give them a simpler version like this, where it's just 1 through 11 and we're reading one sentence at a time. And then, like Marcia said, there's not a lot of brain power for tricky comprehension questions. So we just want to ask factual, simple comprehension questions where the answer can be found in the text. And we follow that up with the after reading with just going back to the text again and reading for fluency. In our next training in this series, we'll talk a little bit more about how to assess for fluency.
Okay, Jamie, would you allow me to share my screen, please?
Of course.
First sharing, and then I will share. We're going to do an activity now that is appropriate for all levels. So the language experience approach you can do with beginners, with intermediate and advanced learners. The learner is creating a text, and because they're using their own language, it's going to be at a level that is appropriate for them. We did share or send a video out to you ahead of time as a previewing activity. If you did watch the video, a lot of this will be review and reinforcement for you. If you weren't able to watch the video before this session, that is totally fine. We're going to go through each part of this activity together. So the language experience approach can be used with native speakers, and it can also be used with non-native speakers and English language learners. And again, it can be used at all different levels. So in the language experience approach, you start by talking with your learner and identifying an experience that you want to talk about. You focus the conversation and ask the student to tell you a story. You write exactly what the student says. You can either do this like with a pencil and paper. Tonight, we're going to demonstrate doing this directly onto a Word document. You read and verify the story. So you read it back or you read it together. You can read the story to the student, have the student read the story to you, and then you can work on different reading and writing skills with that story. The student's story becomes the text for this lesson and for subsequent lessons, for future lessons as well. So the benefits of language experience approach, or LEA, is that it's very empowering for the learner to see their own words in print. So this may be the first time that a particular learner has seen their own words or seen their own story. And it emphasizes the connection between oral and written language, because we're starting with the story that the learner tells you out loud and you write it down. It helps you understand what the student's vocabulary and language structure is, what their level is of the language, both if they're a native speaker or a non-native speaker. And it allows even beginning students to produce sophisticated writing. You may have a learner who is very vocal and tells really long stories, and this is an opportunity to get that all down in writing and for them to see something lengthy and complex that has come from them. You can do this both with individuals or groups. Most of my experience is doing it with an entire class, but most examples I have seen of it is doing it one-on-one. And then it works well with new students. This is something you could do in your first lesson with your student, or it could be something that you just revisit maybe on a monthly basis, or however frequently you find that it works for you and your learner. So the steps are to listen the story, write the story down, read the story together as a tutor and learner, and then you can go through corrections. So when you write the story down, you do it exactly as your learner says the story. So Shannon and I are going to demonstrate what this activity looks like. So Shannon, you told me before that you bought a lot of apples. Can you tell me a little bit about what you plan to do with those apples?
Sure. So I plan to make an apple crisp recipe that a friend gave me.
Oh, that sounds that sounds delicious and wonderful. So Shannon, we're going to write a story today. I would like you to talk to me about the apples. So you can tell me about how you got the apples and what you plan to do with them, and I'm going to write it down.
Okay. Yesterday, my friend gave me a bag of fresh apples that came from her tree. And I love to bake, so I am going to make an apple crisp to share with my family. And I plan to share my new recipe with my friend.
Thank you so much, Shannon, for sharing your story. I'm going to read your story to you. Yesterday, my friend gave me a bag of fresh apples that came from her tree, and I love to bake, so I'm going to make an apple crisp to share with my family. And I plan to share my new recipe with my friend. Now let's do an echo reading. So I will read and then you repeat. Yesterday, my friend gave me
Yesterday, my friend gave me
a bag of fresh apples
a bag of fresh apples
that came from her tree.
that came from her tree.
Okay, so the purposes of this training, we're not going to go through the whole story. So then we can also do it as a choral reading. So Shannon, let's read it together.
Okay.
Yesterday, my friend gave me a bag of fresh apples. Okay, so we're going to stop there again, just because we're modeling this for you tonight, and not going to, for the sake of time, going to go through all of it. So now this is the text that I will use with Shannon in our lesson. There are a variety of different activities we can do here. I am going to assume that these are words that mean something to Shannon, that are motivating to her, because they're words that she produced herself. And it's a topic that she had been talking to me about before. So I drew on her experiences and her interests. And so again, I assume that these are things that she cares about and are motivating for her. So some activities that we can do with this is maybe we've been studying punctuation. And so I wouldn't want to use this to teach a new lesson or to bring up something, a new point. But if this is something we've been talking about before, I can bring in some review. I could say, okay, Shannon, this first sentence is a really long sentence because when we talk, we connect a lot of ideas together. But in writing, we want to make our sentences shorter. Can you find a place in here where maybe we can cut our sentence?
maybe we can cut it after they came from her tree.
Okay, wonderful. So what would I put after tree to show that I want this sentence to stop here?
Period.
Okay, wonderful. And then what do I do with the word and?
We can get rid of it.
All right, we will get rid of it. Okay, so this is an example of a way that Shannon and I can work with the text in a meaningful way to bring in previous lessons we had. I'm going to show a variety of different things that you can do with your text. Let's see if I can, perfect, bring it up again. So we could do grammar corrections. That's what Shannon and I just did here. Grammar practice. So if she wrote her story or told her story in the past tense, maybe we want to change it to the present tense. We can do close activities. This is something we're going to do in future sessions as well, but a close activity is when you take some words out and then put them back in. So maybe we take out sight words. So words that are very common, like my and me. Because I've done this digitally and have it right here, I can do this real easily. If you could also create an activity for the next lesson. So if you wrote it in your notebook, you could go home and type it and bring it back the next time and then have Shannon fill it in. Jamie showed an example of when you have a word bank. So you could have a list of words down here below that the learner could choose from to fill in the blanks. So they find the word here and then type it up here. So this again is an example of a close activity. You could make flashcards for words that the learner wants to learn. Rearrange the order. So maybe she was telling me a story about her weekend and we print out the story, chop it up, and she can put it back into order, or use some of the tools that Jamie was using where you could manipulate online to put things in a different way. Could practice fluency and expressive reading. So having Shannon read the story, depending on what it was, with a lot of expression. Could create comprehension questions for your learner to read. If Shannon was telling me about a vacation or an adventure she went on, you could pull out a map and trace her activities, or have her find where she was for whatever activity she was talking to you about. Could talk about the cause and effect. So really, you can use any kind of reading strategy with this text that you put together with your learner. So now we want to give you an opportunity to practice a language experience approach in a breakout. So Jamie is going to put us into some rooms, and please don't be worried. We will have a staff member from Wisconsin Literacy in each breakout room to help you. And I think we'll go in for about 6 minutes, Jamie, if you could set us up for 6 minutes. If it's longer than that's okay. So when you're in your breakout room, you're going to choose who is the tutor and who is the student. And one of you will bring up a Word document or a Google Doc to do the typing. Again, don't worry, there will be Wisconsin Literacy staff in your breakout room to help you. Welcome back. Real quickly to wrap up, I'm just curious, we made a wonderful soup, or Louise is describing a soup she's making. And we did we talked about doing a close activity, taking some of the words out, or even drawing a picture to accompany our story. What ideas did you have to work with your stories.
That is very ironic, Anna, because Julie also told a story about a delicious soup she made.
Oh,
So it's soup season.
yes, it is for sure.
And we even pulled that using a map because we were talking about it was a Scandinavian soup.
Oh, you were
Pam,
okay. Wonderful.
Pam, we talked, she had a lovely day today going for a hike, and she recently moved to Wisconsin from Phoenix, and has quite an education background. So we chatted about just the value of this type of an activity. So
Excellent. Excellent. All right. Well, we are getting just to the end of our training, so I'm going to pass it back to Jamie.
Right, so we have just 3 more things to do as we wrap up tonight. The first, the can-do list. Thank you. So we're going to share that final poll, which mimics a self-assessment. I'm launching it now. It's a can-do list. So it just asks you to reflect on our training objectives tonight and to check the ones that you feel pretty good about, that you feel like you can do those now. We have varying degrees of confidence, but it was just an exercise in assessing yourself. So thank you very much for that. And we are going to talk about some next steps after tonight's training. And then Shannon's going to leave you with a success story, a tutor student success story. So stick around for that because it'll be a great, inspiring way to leave tonight. Anna, could you advance the slide to the next steps? All right, so we want to remind you after tonight's training to ask your program about their goal setting and assessment processes. What kinds of information are you going to get about your learner if you haven't already been matched? Please read the post-training packet that will be coming to you via email tomorrow. And if you haven't already, register for the next trainings in our series, ABE 2 and 3.
Okay, we would like to end our session tonight just to talk about a success story about why you're all here. And thank you guys for coming to this session, and you're doing such impactful work in your communities. This success story is about a man named Matt who worked with the Shawano County Literacy Council. Matt's the student and Jeannie's the tutor. And Matt's goals were he wanted to go and get his GED and then to further education by taking some business classes. He was an owner of a farm. And Jeannie shares this story. I have to tell you, in all honesty, Matt is my hero. I adore him. The boost to Matt's self-confidence is immeasurable. And Matt shares, Jeannie has just been awesome to work with and getting me the help I need. I want to keep going. That's my plan. Even after I get my GED, I want to keep taking classes. You can't go wrong with an education. So Jamie put the link in the story. We have so many wonderful stories out on our website. They're great to go and read and to learn about. And hopefully you'll be adding your success story to our list as you embark on the journeys with your learners. So thank you all so much for being here tonight. We hope to see you at our next sessions next week.